I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening, and welcome to Single Shot Show at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. Do experiment, in photography. We are always starting to experiment a lot when we are starting for our photography, and then it succeeds. We're basically starting to get fixed in our ways, pretty conservative about trying something new, and then we see one of those posts on social media or read an article or acquiring it from some other source, and we see this new amazing thing we never did, and we're trying it. Most of us don't do it that often, but there is a group of photographers who are actually pioneering almost every new technique, and they're always reshuffling our old archives with what we was doing before. And basically they the ones who creating those posts and writing those articles and reminding us and educating us about all those new techniques. And in order to discuss it, we invited once again Ian Clifford. We spoke with him a year ago about photography already, and he's one of the people who is constantly experimenting and constantly searching for the new things. And as I understand, over this year, he was working with several techniques, some of which not new by birth, but pretty new in terms of people starting to use them again. And some of them are brand new, so we wanted to talk a little bit about it, share what you learned over this year, and generally meet again this great photographer. Hello, Ian. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks. Welcome.
So,
thank you for inviting me back, and congratulations to you on over a year of great and engaging programming with photography.
Thanks. It was thanks to people like yourself who was making this show great. So let's talk about experimenting.
Well, recently I've been doing some night photography where I've been going around in Central Park and taking pictures of pretty well-known subject matter, but with no lights on. So I've been doing light paintings. And what it basically involves is just using a LED light panel and a LED flashlight with gels on them to color correct the light, and painting the subjects with from various angles to arrive at something that's a little different, in its final appearance, that maybe shed a different kind of a light on the subject that most people wouldn't see. And one thing that's really wonderful about it is the texture. A lot of the time in daylight, texture gets washed out of an image.
Yes.
And when you're able to control the light and pinpoint where it hits and the angle it hits the subject matter, you can really bring out the texture and the kind of just the luxurious surfaces that might otherwise be missed in a everyday daylight situation. And so this has been something that's really engaging me and bringing me back to the idea of nighttime photography. And it also has to do with that Rembrandt light, that beautiful, dark, deep shadow with a particular golden light shed on the subject to kind of highlight it, focus on it, make it a part of the viewing experience.
Well, it's actually what's so interesting about revisiting all the techniques like long exposure and light painting.
Yeah.
when you start, you're just experimenting with it and you treat it like a toy. Same thing as, say, the fisheye lens.
Yeah.
When you first get in the fisheye lens in your hand, you're just amazed how unusual the look is, and you, oh my God, it gives you so many new opportunities, and you end up understanding that it doesn't that much depend on the lens, on the technique. You actually need to precisely know what you're doing. And that's exactly why revisiting technique like this, when you're already seasoned photographer and you already did a lot of work in many directions and have general understanding of photographic theory, it's good time to revisit something like this and see what it can provide to you. And just as you said, you can actually use it to reveal the textures invisible in the other situation. You can actually use it to create lighting which in any other situation would be impossible, like on this shot of the Bethesda fountain area, the colonnade going under it. Only the long exposure will actually reveal this particular area in even balance between bottom and top part.
It's really kind of like combining mathematics with something very ephemeral. Like it's, in a way, trying to make the seen and the unseen meet together and push the sensory experience beyond just what one can see to impart certain lyricism to it. Much in the same way you do with your photography. It's I call your photography visual poetry, and I really, maybe in a sense, it's inspired me to try to look deeper into what I'm doing from the standpoint of connecting the seen and the unseen.
Oh, thank you. And as I see, there are two aspects here. In one, all these devices, when you're using them as a tool, not as a toy, they allowing you to actually reveal the actual look of the object. We actually had a discussion on that matter with Anthony Hoth at some point. Basically, human eye is a very precise instrument, and sometimes what we see with our eyes is very tough to be replicated with photography, especially if we talk about unfavorable conditions like night shooting. Basically, it's prone to provide you with huge highlights and complete black everywhere else. So the long exposure, especially correctly processed, is exactly the way to show how it looks in reality. Because it always makes me wonder, actually, when we look at all those old photographs and we believe that we actually see what was happening there, but we don't really see what was happening there. We see what photographer and technology that was used is providing us with. When it was a bright day, everything is white, but it was a blue sky and it was the gray pavement, not everything white and some very dark shadows.
Well, that's the nuance and the wonderful thing about digital photography and from the standpoint of post-processing.
Exactly.
Is that you really get to push the envelope of what you're capable of looking at. And it's funny, like with a lot of the social media and stuff like that, people aren't really able to see the detail or the grain or there's a lot of nuance that's actually lost in the process of converting it to a smaller file or from a 16-bit file to an 8-bit file, where you lose a lot of the like I said, the nuance of the image. But then again, that's its own thing entirely. And I think that it's not lost in translation. It's just a different incarnation of that particular image. So it's kind of, all I know is that when I'm taking photographs lately at night, I'm able to find myself and my passion for the discipline again and again. Oh. And it brings me back to what photography was originally doing for me, which was building a bridge, creating a way to get back to myself.
Oh, that's Actually, another aspect out of those two I was talking about, besides just revealing how it really looks using devices that in a way are natural, you actually can create something completely different using all the devices, something that never existed really. And we're always on the show paying very close attention to areas of photography which focusing on that particular part, and this indeed is, in my personal opinion, is future of photography. That's where we're going to be going.
Well, recently I've had some experience that was kind of outside of my purview, in that I was doing some studio photography. And I had the opportunity to do both flash photography and LED constant light photography.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely decided that I liked the constant light photography more because, although as I become more adept at flash photography, I realized that it was better to take pictures where the light was constant.
Wow.
And I could see it.
Well, the constant light photography in studio is actually another thing that came to us with digital age, and we will talk about it after the break. Hello, this is Alex IG from Single Shot with the next single trick. Today we're going to be talking about uneven lighting. More often you have to deal with just one strong source of light. The strongest one, of course, would be the sun. And when it happens, half of your object is lit very brightly and another half is very dark, just like my face right now. Is there anything you can do about it? Sure. You can have professional lighting equipment, you can have professional light bouncing screens, and many other things. But the simplest and easiest thing you can use, especially if you're doing it in a casual environment, is a regular piece of paper. Put it right against the direction of light, and you will get the source of light balanced and your light being just right. Okay, so we was talking about constant light versus flashlight, and indeed it became relevant only with emergence of digital photography. For film photography, it really didn't make much of a difference whether you're using flash or constant light, especially if you have the pre-flash on constant, and you can actually see how the light distributes. But for digital photography, it actually makes a lot of difference whether you can see the actual light at the actual moment of the taking a frame. So,
well, I just found that with constant light and able to direct a scene and build a scene that involves many different subject matters and different different objects and stuff arranged in a particular scene, that I was able to get much more clarity in terms of where my shadows were going to be, and where my highlights were, where my hot spots were, and also bringing that into doing some stop motion animation, which is basically just a lot of photography. Indeed. That comes out, and I was having a lot of fun with getting to do some stop motion recently as well in the studio, and found that it's really, really, really enjoyable. I got some new software called Dragon Frame, and was doing some commercial type work, advertisement work and using stop motion animation to do it, and just having a fantastic time with it. The idea of stop motion and what you can do to get different conceptual points across is really be difficult to arrive at in any other way. And you know, with the software, there's a thing called onion skinning, where you're actually seeing a ghosted image of your last frame over the current frame, what you're working on through the computer to monitor. You're actually tethered to the camera, and you can see, you know, so the last frame, so you can actually see something develop over time, and you've kind of got a trail of breadcrumbs, which is the onion skinning. So you're able to create really nuanced stop motion animation, and but you have all of this, you know, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. You know, where Ray Harryhausen in the 60s was flying by the seat of his pants and didn't know what the last frame looked like as compared to the next frame. We have this amazing technology that allows us to do, you know, virtually anything that we can conceive of. And so back to the constant light.
Yeah.
It was very helpful to have that in the studio in order to create these stop motion animations and stuff like that.
What's your preference in terms of temperature? Do you prefer tungsten temperature?
I like, and I find myself liking cooler light situations now, like 38K, and then using gels, like warming gels, like an orange, like a 50% transparent, warming to kind of balance the light temperature, and or you can play with it. But it's funny how you can really arrive by manipulating the color temperature of the lights, and then in post bringing it up a little bit back towards the blue, that you can really arrive at your own kind of a unique signature look. You know, like where they you know, color grading has become all the rage now, because anybody can manipulate captured footage and, or, you know, photography, and change and manipulate the color, the saturation, the density of the shadows and all that. And but I like to do it in camera. I'm finding that that's more exciting, because then even if you, in post photography, if you want to go a little bit past where you were, that's okay. But to kind of get it into the general neighborhood of what you're looking for in camera gives you a leg up in terms of noise reduction and all of the pratfalls of what might happen if you go too deep in post.
Well, I'm not a big supporter of the concept that everything have to be done in a camera and you should be able to open a computer and do nothing with it. I do not believe that at this day and age it actually make any practical sense, but indeed there are some things that you always have to take in account, and yes, there is always a degree of what you can do with the final footage, but there is always a limit.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes if you actually have a tungsten lit image, even if you change the temperature, it will not look natural because of the distribution of light characteristic for the yellow lights being different from distribution of light characteristic for the cooler temperature. And besides that, there is one thing that is instrumentally different between film and digital, the exposure. In film, you are better overexposed than underexposed, and in digital it's vice versa. So if you can do a lot of things wrong and correct it afterwards, fix it in Photoshop, fix it in motion production software, whichever you're using, but if it's overexposed for digital footage, at some point it becomes to be unhandleable. It's just white.
Yeah, unmanageable. Yeah. Well, I mean, since we met last too, I've really been trying to wrap my brain around the concept of social media.
That's
and not social media from in terms of promoting a particular fine art, but social media for advertising, and like the 30-second spot, like the Instagram spot, or you know, posting something on Facebook. But it's the idea of providing an engaging experience and limiting it to like 30 seconds that I find that to be a fascinating puzzle, an
It is
equation.
indeed, yes.
And it's not so much like it's an art form unto itself, you know. I mean, from
Sure.
the, you know, and I really think that in this particular era, people they crave that engagement. Like, you know, people are looking to YouTube, people are looking to Instagram, people are looking to Facebook and Pinterest and all these various, for that, like, quick hit of sensory engagement that allows them entree into whatever you're selling, you know, whether it's
Indeed.
your own pictures or your, whatever, something that you're building. It's really
The commercial
Yeah.
project, essentially, yeah. It's actually, in general, very interesting phenomena that the further it goes, the more we have to deal with decrease in attention span.
yeah,
It actually works for still images as well.
yeah, yeah.
People really have very little attention. If in the early days of social media, if you post something, people, if they remotely interested in it, would actually click on it, open it in a large size, and see all those details I was mentioning before. Now, people actually need to be able to see something on this preview, on a thumbnail of various sizes, depending on the platform, and you have to actually engage them with this small size image. So, especially if you're creating something commercial, not just purely artistic, you have to take in consideration not the whole size view, but also the small size view.
And the psychology of it as well, down to what you title it, what you subtitle it, what you give it, what hashtags you give it, and all of that. But I think it's an interesting sociological experiment because let's face it, since we've been making movies, it's all social media,
Well,
but the terms and parameters have changed.
indeed. Yeah, and on top of everything, since all this started, the whole set of attention span on everything was completely modified. We have another break and a few minutes after that to conclude our conversation. We'll be back. Hello, this is Alex AG from Single Shot with another single trick. Tonight I want to tell you a little bit about post-production. There is one feature in Photoshop and many other photo editing programs that being used scarcely. That's channels. And there is only one reason why it is so. Nobody understands what it is for. Well, not nobody, but a lot of people don't. So when you see an image just like this, you are getting in channel that. And that's very counterintuitive because you actually supposed to be seeing this. 3 separate sets of color, not of grayscale. So if you would think of each channel as specific color, for example, of red being red instead of grays, blue being blue instead of grays, and green likewise, you'll find channels very useful for editing. Okay, we're back, and we was talking about engaging people in social media for motion graphics and for still images, and indeed, yeah, it really changed. Just one little phenomena. Instead of watching full-length movies, people now prefer to watch episodes of serials, which are on average 40 minutes instead of hour 20 minutes, which is typical for an average movie. It's very significant change there indeed.
It's a product of narrowbanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I just find it fascinating how you know, people's interests are kind of encapsulated around the time format and even the scale, like the size ratio of, I mean, like before websites and Instagram, nobody would ever have thought of making a square a one-to-one crop.
I did.
Okay, yeah, you did, yeah, but you know what I mean. For the most part,
Absolutely, yes.
or like creating a piece of video that's a banner that's like, wow. 1 by 12 or
16 to 9
yeah.
became to be pretty standard proportions now.
But
yes.
like that's the idea, that you can create a video format or a still image format that is completely open to the interpretation of whoever's, and that's pretty interesting. But I think that by and large, the content that you're pushing is really, what sings the song at the end of the day. But how you present it is becoming more and more specialized as time goes on.
Wow, presentation actually the theme for the whole separate conversation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you one last question.
Sure,
You
sure.
indeed do a lot of experiments, and I know over this year you did quite a few.
Yeah.
And obviously, you can't keep everything you try in your toolbox. Is there any specific way you decide in which ones you keep and incorporate in your process, and which ones you just use them for a while and letting it go, probably table for the future?
I guess half of it is really how I feel about the medium, and then the other half becomes more or less lowest common denominator. Like what will get my point across in the least amount of time, with the least amount of obstacles, but still deliver it in a way that's acceptable to me artistically.
That's an excellent formula for that. Actually, everybody who is about to experiment with something new, you definitely should look at it from that specific perspective. Those three, they just defining what you need to keep. And indeed, photographers also bombarded with information, so that's important that it's not causing too much effort to achieve your goals. Thank you very much, Ian. It was super insightful. We should check on your experiments as often as we can.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Alex.
It was a great.
All right. All right.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.